One of the great distortion tools inside of Photoshop is the Puppet Warp. Now, Puppet Warp originated in After Effects as a way to do some kind of hilarious animations, but it had so much potential it got moved over into Photoshop around CS5, I believe it was. So to demonstrate this, I've gone to good old Pixabay to get this photograph of a woman leaping. I've added some text because puppet warping and text can be a blast as well. I will be showing you how to use Puppet Warp to do corrections on textures or texture-like effects. We'll be using that later for this assignment. So to begin, we're going to need to get this figure because we're going to want to just Puppet Warp her. Now, the fastest way to do that is to painstakingly make a selection, and I did that already since you all know how to make selections. It's essentially just time on task, sit there and start selecting until you've got it all. Now that I've got it, I can either copy and paste, or I can do a jump command, which is Control-Alt-J, and it will bring it up and ask me what I want. I could say I want a new layer, then I could just say lady leaping, and now I've got, the Control-Alt-J is the same thing essentially. It's just copy and paste. Now this is going to be a little low resolution, so it's going to have some strange effects, but I'll talk about those as we get to it. So we've got the lady leaping, but we also have this background, so we really need to clean that up as well. Let me reload that selection. I'm just going to control click on the lady leaping since she was made out of that selection. Come on over here. I need this a little bigger because I'm going to do a content aware fill. So I'm just going to go to select, modify, expand. The default of 20 should be fine. So I've got a nice big chunk here. I'm going to go to edits, and I'm going to do a content aware fill rather than a fill content aware, because this is as straightforward as you'd expect. It has this little mask going on that shows you where the sampled area is, and you can change the opacity on it. That's about it. It has the color adaptation if you need to change that to higher or lower, rotation adaptation, scale, mirror, all those. We don't need to do any of those right now. Same as the tools I've demonstrated in past videos. The only difference really is that we have the ability to create it on a duplicate layer. So I'm going to tell it OK, and voila, Control D, I've got a duplicate layer of the fill, and that's great. There's a bit of a distortion in there. It might be good to come in here with maybe the healing brush tool and just get a big enough healing brush to get in there, maybe a little smaller, I say, there we go, to get in there, alt click, and then just patch that up a little bit so that it's going. But that doesn't really matter for the Puppet Warp, so let's just leave well enough alone for now, and if need be, we will add those adjustments later. So we've got a background, and we've got the lady leaping, and we've got the text for Puppet Warp, so we're ready to dive into this thing. Almost. You probably want to Puppet Warp on smart objects so that you can revisit the edit later. If you don't do it on a smart object, the transformation is a destructive edit, and then that's it. It's done. There's no going back. So let's convert this to a smart object. I always like to just do the right click, convert to smart object, since I'm over there. So I've got the lady leaping, and then we'll have the background. And as long as I'm labeling things, let's call this original. And what's a good thing to do when you've done this much work? Save. Control S, and I'm good to go. I'm going to select the lady leaping, and I'm going to go to Edit, Puppet Warp. Now, Puppet Warp brings up this little tool preference bar at the top of the screen here, and you can see that the mouse has changed to this pin. Now that we're in Puppet Warp, though, I may want to zoom in because I can't see what's going on. If I were to try to grab the magnifying tool, it would say, well, wait, do you want to apply the Puppet Warp? Cancel. So what I'm going to do instead is use my middle mouse scroll wheel, hold down the Alt key, and just scroll up. If you don't have that, you can always go to Window, bring up your navigator. Your navigator will have a zoom, and that will allow you to zoom in no matter what tool you're on or what you're doing. So Navigator is super useful for situations exactly like this. So we've got pins. What do those do? Well, let me stick a pin in it. Haha. And you can see that with one pin, I can just move her around. But what if I put in a second pin? Now it's distorting according to where they are. So it's like she's made out of taffy, and I'm putting little thumbtacks on the taffy, and I'm using those thumbtacks to stretch it out and then pin it down. And you can see, because the image is somewhat low resolution, we're getting these pixelated distorting effects on everything as it goes through. Another thing you might notice right away is that we've got this weird line occurring across it. Well, there are two reasons for it. First, as I stated, it's a lower resolution, which means that it will start to fake things out. The other is we have something called expansion. Now, at first glance, it doesn't seem to be doing anything. So let's peel back the curtain and see how Puppet Warp is actually changing things. I'm going to toggle this button here that says Show Mesh. Show Mesh demonstrates that once we are doing a Puppet Warp, it draws this little distortion mesh around things. Anytime we click somewhere inside of it, it will add a pin to the distortion mesh and allow us to edit it. Now, here's something else that's useful. This warning dialog will come up a lot, and it says, cannot add a new pin because it's too close to an existing pin. To increase the number of available points, choose density, more points. Okay, well, that's what these are, right? This is the density of the mesh. There is no density menu, but there's a density dropdown. We can do fewer points, which means that a click will have a really drastic effect immediately, just one pin, or we can do more points, which allows us to have finer control over things and to place pins closer together. So when you're doing something like a texture edit, you probably want the more points. But if you're doing just a big fun thing, maybe normal or fewer points. Now we've got too many pins though, right? I'm going to hold down the Alt key. That will do two things. It will change my tool and allow me to either click on it to remove it, see the little scissor icon that shows up on the selected pin, or if you go outside of the selected pin's radius, you'll have the ability to rotate things. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the pin, and then Alt key and click on a pin, and Alt key and click on a pin to get rid of those. All right, so we're going to leave it at normal point. And we can see the image better right now. Now you'll notice that if I zoom in a little bit more, and I'm just going to do that using the navigator and pop up the navigator, the mesh doesn't perfectly go over the cutout image. Well, that has to do with the expansion. As I'm going to use the up arrow. As the expansion gets bigger, you can see the mesh is slowly stepping away from the figure. As the mesh gets smaller, it gets tighter and tighter, closer and closer to the figure. Default's 2 pixels. At 1 pixel, it's a very small amount. At 0 pixels, it's even smaller. I'm going to hold down spacebar to move. Now you can see that the yellow line that was appearing has pretty much disappeared. If we increase the mesh, though, it's going to generate it. If we were to OK all of this, and see if that get back to where we are, we could see that sure enough it left that line. So that's something that you need to take care of during the Puppet Warp. Now to get back into the Puppet Warp, since it's a smart object, I can just double click Puppet Warp and I'm right back to editing. So let's go ahead and drop that expansion down to 0 pixels. That will take care of the majority of that line. The rest of it has to do with the low resolution of the lady. So that's creating those bright white, wide yellow lines. But that line does bring up something else that's somewhat interesting. Let me go in here. Let's actually make it a little bit bigger for just a moment so we can really see it. I'm going to turn off the mesh. You can do that with Control H if you want to. Control H will toggle that on and off. Notice how the leg is going in front of the arm. That has to do with where the pins are in their depth. So what does that mean? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to click on this pin to select it. And then up here, I have the pin depth up set forward. You can press it multiple times to resolve overlap. And I have set pin backwards. Wow, under pin depth. And it can be pressed multiple times as well. I'm going to go up. Look at that. This is now above, the arm is now above the leg. Pretty wild, right? So I'm going to knock down this expansion back to 0 just so that we don't have as big of a line. And again, a higher resolution image and even a tighter mask would allow us to correct it a little more easily. So you could do some painful edits here, but other things that you can do is hold down the Shift key to select multiple pins. Notice how both of these have a darker blue dot. So I can move them around. Now, if you ever get a situation where you're too close to an edge, and it's complaining again because I clicked off of it. If you get too close to an edge, you'll see this painful distortion happening. Now, there are a couple of things you could try to do to fix that. You can check the mode. Right now we're on normal. If we go to distort, you're going to get this hilarious effect where things expand and contract in amazing ways depending on how close pins are to each other. The closer they get to each other, the more they'll shrink. The further away, the more they'll bloat. So you've got that. But you also have something called rigid. And rigid will try to keep that pinching effect from occurring. I'm going to leave it at normal for a moment. Notice that it didn't do a very good job. The other thing you can do is once you've moved a pin and you can see that it's kind of grabbed it at a weird point, just click somewhere else and use 2 pins so that you can bloat it up, or click further in and then Alt to delete the other ones. And hopefully you notice that there's less of a pinch here. Hopefully if you get far enough in, you'll get rid of the pinch. So if you do have a situation where it's just pinching too much, 2 pins will let you stretch it out, again like taffy, and 2 pins will also let you squash stuff in. So you can notice that pins work, I keep missing, there we go. Pins work not just to distort, but also to pin things right into place. All right, so I'm going to undo a little bit. I'm just going to Alt click to get rid of those pins. There we go. All right, so we've done some bizarre distortions. I just tried to zoom out without using my navigator and immediately was complaining. So we've got some bizarre distortions. I don't like what's happening to the face there. I'm going to drag that in a little bit. You can also, of course, rotate, hold down the Alt key, go outside, and I could do some weird stuff with that as well. Let's do the leg instead. I'm going to click right on the pin, Alt key. Here we go. So we've got the puppet warp going on. Ta-da. So I want to OK this. So I just press the commit. Oh, you can also do different types of rotation. Let me do a fixed rotation just to show you what that looks like as compared to an auto rotation. You can see that the auto rotation tries to do a little more with the edit than the fixed. All right, that's all the controls up here. You can also undo. I don't want to do that. I'm just going, you can cancel. I don't want to cancel. I want to apply the effects. Now, if I want to see what it looked like originally, I'll just click the puppet warp, and there she was before and after. And again, if I wanted to take care of that line, I'd need to mask in a little bit more. I could also, I suppose, go in to the original and thicken it out. And what do I mean by that? Let me double click it. You can see how in my initial selection, it's a little fuzzy around the edges. I'm just going to duplicate her to darken in that area. I could do it a couple of times if I wanted. Save, close that, and see how that helped that quite a bit, but now we've got some more jaggediness going around the edges. So noticing immediately that there's a trade-off, I could go in and do something like a big mask for everything but the arm. And how would I do that? Well, I'd come in with the marquee tool, make sure that I'm not on a fixed size, and then on these layers, just mask them away. Oops, Control I. There we go. Hold down the Alt key and drag down to duplicate. And actually, I should have done the rest of that arm first. Let me fill that in with some black as well. There we go. All right, so now it just exists on the arm. Save, Control S, Control W to close the tab. That did help the arm a little bit, and we don't have quite as much jaggediness. Again, a tighter mask would be the better way to go on that. Okay, so that's Puppet Warp on the lady. What about this text? Well, let me save because things are going well. If I were to try to Puppet Warp the text directly, Puppet Warp, edit Puppet Warp, you'll notice that it says it must be rasterized. I don't want to do that. I want to edit this text again later. I'm going to right click instead and convert it to a smart object. This will encapsulate everything so that it's all nice and safe. Now I can come in with an edit Puppet Warp, and now it will allow me to do edits with pins, and I can click. And if I want to move multiple ones, shift click, and I've got my Puppet Warp. So I could stretch things out if I so desired. I missed a little bit. Oh, it's complaining. I'm going to go ahead and set the density to more points. There we go. That will let me get in there. I'm going to leave that one and do the changes a little more easily. I'm going to click inside the W in a few places. I'm missing quite a bit, so it's going to have a little bit less of the effect that I want. I'm going to come back in and repin. There we go. Now you can see that I can warp things, even text. And if you want, you can do it with fewer clicks. And you'll get some sometimes very hilarious results. So it's worth experimenting. Look how fun that P is when I warp the P. All right, I'm going to click and shift click to grab a couple of them. Control click to, whoops, get rid of it. Oh no, sorry. Shift click to get rid of it. And then just drag that up. All right, what if I wanted to move this exclamation mark? Not a problem. Remember, a single pin allows you to move things. So hold down the Alt key here, and I can rotate. Notice no rotation seems to be occurring because with only one pin, there's not really any rotation to be done. The minute that I put in another pin, I've clearly damaged the exclamation mark. So I'm going to come in and remove the second pin there with the Alt key. There we go. So I think that what I really need to do, oh, and check this out. If you remove both of these pins, it will bounce right back to where it needs to go, to where it originated from. All right, so pin, just drag that down. What if I want it to be wider? Not a problem. I could do a 1 pin, 2 pin, and spread it out. Now, I didn't grab that particularly well, so let me try that again. Oh no, what if it's all going wrong? Just delete a few pins. Oh, I see, I flipped these pins around. This one needs to be on this side, and this one needs to be on that side. So you can have some fun just clicking away inside and doing all these adjustments. Okay, so let me move this little dot down a little bit. Okay, so we've got, I'm going to apply that. Puppet Warp. That's the Puppet Warp tool. In the next video, I'll show you how you can use this to adjust texture through rotation and other such effects. I'll see you in the next video.